And now the winds, which had so long been from the northwest, began to blow from the west itself, and every morning when the sun rose out of the sea, the curved prow of the dawn treader stood up across the middle of the sun. Some thought that the sun looked larger than it had from Narnia, but others disagreed. And they sailed and sailed before a gentle yet steady breeze, and saw neither fish nor gull, nor ship nor shore. And the stores began to get low again, and it crept into their hearts that perhaps they might have come to a sea which went on forever. But when the very last day on which they thought they could risk continuing their eastward voyage dawned, it revealed, right ahead between them and the sunrise, a low land lying like a cloud. They made harbor in a wide bay about the middle of the afternoon and landed. It was a very different country from any they had yet seen. For when they had crossed the sandy beach, they found all silent and empty, as if it were an uninhabited land. But before them were level lawns in which the grass was as smooth and short as it used to be in the grounds of a great English house, where 10 gardeners were kept, the trees of which there were many. All stood well apart from one another, and there were no broken branches and no leaves laying on the ground. Pigeons sometimes cooed, and there was no other noise. Presently they came to a long, straight, sanded path with not a weed growing on it, and trees on either hand. Far off at the other end of this avenue, they now caught sight of a house, very long and gray and quiet-looking in the afternoon sun. Almost as soon as they entered this path, Lucy noticed that she had a little stone in her shoe. In that unknown place, it might have been wiser for her to ask the others to wait while she took it out. But she didn't. She just dropped quietly behind and sat down to take off her shoe. Her lace had got into a knot. Before she had undone the knot, the others were a fair distance ahead. By the time she had got the stone out and was putting the shoe on again, she could no longer hear them. But almost at once she heard something else. It was not coming from the direction of the house. What she heard was a thumping. It sounded as if dozens of strong workmen were hitting the ground as hard as they could with great wooden mallets. And it was very quickly coming nearer. She was already sitting with her back to a tree, and as the tree was not one she could climb, there was really nothing to do but to sit dead still and press herself against the tree and hope she wouldn't be seen. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Faithful Fables. Today, we continue our voyage to find the remaining 4 lost lords of Narnia. Before we get into things, I want to take a moment to thank everyone that has been listening to these episodes. You know, when I started this podcast last summer, I never thought that I would see so many people interested in it. So thank you to everyone. It's really greatly appreciated. I mean, I've heard from people that I know personally that, you know, I've just gotten a lot of positive feedback. And so thank you so much for all of that. And honestly, it's that kind of support that makes me want to continue doing these episodes. You know, obviously I do it. There's multiple reasons. Obviously it's a good way to share the gospel and to share things that I'm learning about these stories and their connections to the Bible and Christianity. But I also enjoy it, and I enjoy the process. And yeah, it's stressful at times, but like, I still enjoy it. If ever I stop enjoying it, well, then I might not make episodes for a while because I'm not going to put out something that I don't enjoy doing. So thank you for your support and your encouragement. It actually is very helpful to keep the podcast going. And so I want to hear from you guys as well. If there's anything I can do different or anything that you enjoy, please leave a comment and let me know. And I also want to mention that Faithful Fables has become an ambassador for free Luma bracelets. Now, these bracelets have an NFC reader built into them that you can scan with your smartphone, and it opens up a portal to daily Bible verses, mental health support, and a community of fellow believers. And so if you would like one of these for yourself, or if you know somebody who would like them, please feel free to visit freeluma.com and use code STAYFAITHFUL, all one word, capital S, capital F, at checkout, and you can save yourself 15%. It's a good way to support a Christian business trying to get the gospel out to more people, as well as support Faithful Fables and keep these episodes rolling. So now let's get into this. So starting off with what I read in the opening, our supplies is getting low, and it just feels like the sea is going on forever until we see land in the distance finally, and we make harbor there. And so on this island, we see that there's a house that is long, gray, and quiet looking. Lucy all of a sudden notices a stone in her shoe, and she decides to take it out, but she doesn't ask the rest of us to wait for her while she takes it out. And so we all keep going on ahead. We don't even realize that she's doing this. And so she takes off her shoe, and her lace gets stuck in a knot. And during this time, we are now a far distance ahead of her, and she gets the stone out and puts her shoe back on, but she can't hear us anymore. But she does hear something else. And she realizes that the sound is not coming from the house. It was a thumping sound, like a construction worker hitting the ground with a wooden mallet. Then she hears a voice. And this voice says, "Mates, now's our chance." And then there's a bunch of voices who are basically hype men for the first voice. They're just being hype men and hyping him up and agreeing with everything he says. And we will see this throughout our time here. And yeah, it's going to come up again. But the first voice is planning to get our crew, it's planning to get between our crew and the boat and catch us. And then the thumping sound starts again as whatever it was makes its way towards the sea. Now, Lucy was hiding behind the tree, and so they didn't know that she was there. And Lucy knows that there is no time to figure out what the voices and the thumping sound was. But she just runs as fast as she can to the rest of us. And in this time, we've reached the house. And so it was so still, just the whole atmosphere and the whole vibe of the place is just so still that Eustace thinks it's empty, like the house. And Caspian points out that there's smoke coming from the chimneys, so there must be some sort of life there. In the courtyard of the house, there is a pump with a bucket under it. And we notice that the pump is moving, and we don't see anything moving the pump. Caspian assumes it's magic, and Eustace thinks it's machinery of some kind, and that we have finally found a civilized country. And by this point, Lucy's now with us again, and she warns us about what she heard. Reepicheep wonders if these things would be visible if you drive a sword into them, and Caspian says that we will have to find out. So we assume that one of these beings is using the water pump in the courtyard. So we decide to leave the courtyard so that it can't hear us. And we are in the trees now, like we're just within the trees. Eustace points out that there is no use in hiding from something that we cannot see, and that they could be all around us, which is actually a really good point, if you ask me. While we think of our options, Edmund affirms Reepicheep's idea that if these creatures want to fight, they will get a fight. Caspian agrees, and we go to fight. Now, I can imagine that the remaining crew members on the Dawn Treader, it's interesting picturing being them, put yourself on the ship for a second, and they wouldn't even know that we were fighting anyone. It would probably look really strange that they're just like, we're like a bunch of buffoons on this beach, swinging swords around and whatnot, and then possibly some of us even dying or getting injured, and they're watching this happen and they have no idea why or what's happening. I think it would be quite a strange experience to see. Of course we'd be fighting something potentially invisible, but they wouldn't know that either without context. So when we get to the boat, we see no evidence of anyone being there, and we start to wonder if maybe Lucy imagined it. We hear a voice tell us to stop, and that we have to talk first. The voice tells us that there are 50 warriors in their group. Caspian asks the voice what it wants with us, and the voice tells us that they want something that the little girl, being Lucy, can do for them. Reepicheep says that the little girl is a queen, and Lucy asks what it is they think she can do for them. So Reepicheep right away was like, well, actually, that's not a little girl, that's a queen, like, get it right. But Lucy, being who she is, asks them, what do you think I can do for you? And so this one main voice, who we're going to just start calling it the chief voice. That's how C.S. Lewis kind of wrote it in there. So the chief voice tells us about how the island belongs to a magician and that they were his servants. And the magician told them to do something they didn't like. The magician got mad, so he went upstairs and put a spell on them. And it was an uglified spell that made them so ugly they couldn't look at each other anymore. They just couldn't bear to look at each other. And so they wait until the magician was asleep one night, and they went to his magic book to see if they could do anything about it. They couldn't find a spell to reverse it, and they saw a spell to make they saw a spell that makes people invisible. So they figured that they would rather be invisible than ugly. And the thing is that it has to be either a little girl or the magician that does the spell, or it won't work. And the chief's voice, little girl, Clipsy, is the one that did the invisibility spell. It was a relief to not see each other, but that didn't last long, as they were now tired of being invisible. They never thought the magician would also be invisible, but they hadn't seen him since either, so it was possible that he was. And I didn't write this in my notes, but I'm getting a little bit of, a sense of kind of the Israelites wandering in the wilderness. Where, like, they disobey God. God punishes them. They disobey again, and they just complain. And now they just complain. And it's like God keeps doing these things for them. And yeah, sometimes he has to punish them. But so I don't know. I haven't fully thought that through just because it came up right now, but it just kind of gives me some senses of that where so these beings, whatever they are, they don't do what they're told. Okay. So there's a punishment, and now they're ugly, and now they want to do something about it. So they try, and then they do something about it, and then they complain about it. It's still not good enough. It's just, I don't know. It's just something I might have to think about a little bit more. But anyways, they haven't seen the magician since that invisibility spell either. So interesting. During the time this chief voice is telling us the story, he says, long story short, 3 times. And what was a long story for us was also a short version because because C.S. Lewis left out what all the other voices were saying in response. The chief voice never got in 6 or 7 words without the other voices' agreements and encouragements hyping him up, which obviously made all of us very impatient and frustrated because we're trying to listen to this story, but it's getting nowhere and interrupted constantly. And see, I think we need conversations that challenge us, conversations that push us to think in greater ways. And while this conversation would have been challenging for other reasons, not challenging us to think differently or anything like that, but more challenging just to bear it, it's not edifying, to say the least. So Lucy asks them what this has to do with us. And they tell us that they want Lucy to go to the magician's book and say the spell that makes them visible, and if she doesn't do it, they will kill us. So Lucy just asks them, I think what we're all wondering is why their girls don't do it for them. And basically the reason they give us is that they don't want their girls to face danger, so they want Lucy to do it instead. Now, surprisingly, well, if we think about it, probably not so surprisingly, knowing who Lucy is, she says that she'll do it. And she even tells the rest of us not to stop her because, well, for one, we can't fight them. We can't see them. And this is the only way to get out of this situation. Caspian mentions to her that it is, we are dealing with a magician here, and he's a little skeptical. And Lucy, ever the optimist, says that the magician may not be as bad as these voices make him out to be, because honestly, they don't seem very brave, these voices. We don't really know if we fully believe all of this. Edmund begs Lucy not to go, but she is doing this to save our lives, and she makes sure she mentions that. Reepicheep encourages her because it is a noble and heroical act and will not go against her honor as queen. So the voices, invite us for supper and to spend the night. Eustace doesn't want to, and thinking about what she has to do the next day, she's and all just what's going on in general, she's thinking that maybe these voices are not treacherous. We all agree at the end to make our way to the house. Now, I feel like many people at some point in time have wished they were invisible, and I think these creatures are a good example that might not be the best idea. So while feasting with these invisible creatures, it is funny to see the dishes coming out onto the table and not see anyone putting them on the table. Eustace suggests that they're not human, but that they seem more like grasshoppers or even giant frogs. Edmund agrees with him and says not to put the idea of insects into Lucy's head because she doesn't like bugs, especially big ones. Now, the meal would have been better. It would be better if it was not so messy. And if the conversation was here we go again. If the conversation was just not these voices agreeing with each other just constantly. They agree about everything, and most of the remarks are not even easy to agree with. These things that they're saying, it's a frustrating dinner, to say the least. The meal was mushroom soup, boiled chickens, hot boiled ham, gooseberries, red currants, curds, creams, milk, and mead. And Eustace is sorry that he drank the mead. Lucy sees the steps, and she wonders what will happen in the morning. When Lucy woke up the next morning, it was like waking up on the day of an examination or a day when you are going to the dentist. It was a lovely morning, with bees buzzing in and out of her open window, and the lawn outside looking very like somewhere in England. She got up and dressed, and tried to talk and eat ordinarily at breakfast. Then, after being instructed by the chief voice about what she was to do upstairs, she bid goodbye to the others, said nothing, walked to the bottom of the stairs, and began going up them without once looking back. It was quite light. That was one good thing. There was, indeed, a window straight ahead of her at the top of the first flight. As long as she was on that flight, she could hear the tick-tock of a grandfather clock in the hall below. Then she came to the landing and had to turn to her left up the next flight. After that, she couldn't hear the clock anymore. Now she had come to the top of the stairs. Lucy looked and saw a long, wide passage with a large window at the far end. Apparently, the passage ran the whole length of the house. It was carved and paneled and carpeted, and very many doors opened off it on each side. She stood still and couldn't hear the squeak of a mouse, or the buzzing of a fly, or the swaying of a curtain, or anything except the beating of her own heart. The last doorway on the left, she said to herself. It did seem a bit hard that it should be the last. To reach it, she would have to walk past room after room, and in any room there might be the magician, asleep, or awake, or invisible, or even dead. But it wouldn't do to think about that. She set out on her journey. The carpet was so thick that her feet made no noise. There's nothing whatever to be afraid of yet, Lucy told herself. And certainly, it was a quiet, sunlit passage, perhaps a bit too quiet. It would have been nicer if there had not been strange signs painted in scarlet on the doors, twisty, complicated things, which obviously had a meaning, and it mightn't be very nice meaning either. It would have been nicer still if there weren't those masks hanging on the wall. Not that they were exactly ugly, or not so very ugly, but the empty eye holes did look queer, and if you let yourself, you would soon start imagining that the masks were doing things as soon as your back was turned to them. After about the sixth door, she got her first real fright. For 1 second, she felt almost certain that a wicked little bearded face had popped out of the wall and made a grimace at her. She forced herself to stop and look at it. And it was not a face at all. It was a little mirror, just the size and shape of her own face, with hair on the top of it and a beard hanging down from it, so that when you looked in the mirror, your own face fitted into the hair and beard, and it looked as if they belonged to you. I just caught my own reflection with the tail of my eye as I went past, said Lucy to herself. That was all it was. It's quite harmless. But she didn't like the look of her own face with that hair and beard, and went on. I don't know what the bearded glass was for, because I'm not a magician. Before she reached the last door on the left, Lucy was beginning to wonder whether the corridor had grown longer since she began her journey, and whether it was part of the magic of the house. But she got to it at last, and the door was open. So Lucy wakes up, and it feels like the morning of an exam or going to the dentist. She's anxious, but she's trying to act normal. Lucy goes up the stairs, and all she hears is the sound of her own heart beating. She was on her way to the last door on the left, and she tells herself, there's nothing to be afraid of yet. She sees strange signs and masks on the walls. She gets scared thinking she saw the face of a bearded man, but it ended up just being a mirror that had hair and a beard on it. It scared her, and she decides to stare at it, showing her bravery and willingness to overcome fear. Now, C.S. Lewis didn't tell us what this mirror was all about, and he actually explains that he doesn't know what it is for because he is not a magician. I love that in this sense, it is almost like Lewis is experiencing the story instead of authoring it. Like, he's telling us the story, but he's written it in a way that he only knows the details that someone else has told him. And he seems to consider Lucy's point of view often throughout the book. So I almost wonder if it's like Lucy's telling him what happened, and then he is telling us what happened. But we continue. So Lucy wonders if the hallway is all of a sudden getting longer, and if it is part of the magic of the house. And when she gets up to the door, she notices that it's open already. And so in the room, she sees the magician's book in the middle of the room on a stand. The door will not shut behind her. And this, I think, is something we all think about, where we either need to be facing the entire room, like with our backs to the wall, facing the entire room, so we can see everything happening around us, or we close the door behind us. But in this case, the book was positioned in the middle of the room, and it was not possible to close the door. So she's a little uncomfortable, but she realizes that she is going to be looking for a spell for this spell in particular for a long time, because it is a huge book. And on top of that, she already feels like she's been in the house for hours. Now, Caspian warned her about the magician, and we actually get mixed feelings towards magicians, but this magic book has practical things in it too, such as curing warts, but as we will see, it will also have some tempting things in it as well. So maybe it's all in how we respond to these types of things. Now, when Lucy touches the book, her fingers feel tingly, as if the book is full of electricity. The book is so beautiful that she stares at it and forgets to actually read it. But as she's reading it she sees a spell that would make someone more beautiful. And the pictures on the page for this spell are pictures of Lucy. She's looking at herself in the book, which I can imagine that this is a weird experience. Lucy looks away from the page because she is dazzled at the beauty of the other Lucy she sees in the book. The spell describes that all the kings in the world would be fighting for the beauty of the one under this spell. Then she sees something even weirder. She sees herself in England, and Susan is there too. But Susan is plainer and is actually dazzled at Lucy's beauty. No one cared about Susan now either. Now remember that Susan is always known as the beautiful one in their family, and Susan's beauty overshadowed Lucy's. So I can imagine that Lucy would be jealous of that from time to time, and so seeing this would likely make Lucy feel some things. Now, this was the driving force of Lucy caring about her beauty as she started to have the I don't care feelings once Susan is brought into it. Basically, she is starting to feel like, well, I don't care if no one cares about Susan anymore. That's how badly she wants this. And so Lucy wants to say this spell, but she knows that she shouldn't. And just before she reads the spell, she sees Aslan in the pictures on the page. He's growling, and she can see most of his teeth and becomes horribly afraid, so she turns the page. Now, if Lucy had gone through with this spell, there would have been major consequences. Not only would no one care about Susan anymore, but she would also no longer be all the best things about herself, the things that make Lucy Lucy. And she continues to look through the book. She finds a spell that will let someone know what other people think about you or about yourself. So Lucy wants to say this spell as well, now to make up for the other spell. To make up for not saying the other spell. And Lucy sees, she sees two girls that she knows, and she can hear what they're saying. The one says that she is getting tired of Lucy and calls Lucy a two-faced little brat. Lucy knows that she had been good to this girl, so she turns the page. But as she turns it, the page rips. You see, Aslan helped Lucy overcome the first temptation, but she chose to give in to this one. She wants to do this one because she didn't go through with the first one. It's kind of like she is still holding on to the first temptation, and that although the page was turned, she wasn't fully free from it. It is also kind of like a false reward where she says no to the first one, so she'll say yes to this one. When it comes to this temptation, Lucy did not let it get any farther than it already did by not looking at the other pictures on the page. When she turns the page, it tears because it was the heaviest page to turn. And that is when she finds a page in the book that has the greatest story that she has ever read and wanted to read it again and again. But the magic of the book would not let you turn the page back. The story was for refreshment of the soul. After this, Lucy could never fully remember the story again. It is very interesting that she reads this story right after hearing her friend betray her. It would have been hard for her to turn the page, but she needed her soul to be refreshed after that. And I think that's why the page was physically the heaviest to turn, because it was also an emotional and spiritually hard to turn it. But she needed to be refreshed after hearing that. and she wants to hear this story more and more, and she craves it for her soul to be refreshed continuously. Now, we never actually know what this story is, but in my personal opinion, this story could be some type of gospel story, if not the gospel story. All that she can remember is a cup, a sword, a tree, and a green hill. The connection that I think is clear from these things to the gospel is that the cup represents the Last Supper and drinking of wine for communion. The sword represents the Romans that killed him. The trees, obviously the tree is the cross. That Christ, was crucified on. And the green hill represents the hill of Calvary, where it happened on. And when we look at these things, I feel that the story she read must have been a gospel story that refreshes the soul, because it truly does. It truly does refresh your soul. And so she finally finds the spell she's looking for, and she recites the spell. Suddenly, the colors on top of the page are coming to life, and Lucy realizes that everything invisible is now visible, and she is not sure if she wants to see everything. Then she hears footsteps, and she turns around. Now, Lucy didn't know it, but she looked almost as beautiful as the other Lucy in the picture she saw before. She runs down to the doorway because Aslan is there. She turns to greet him. She is comfortable with Aslan and thanks him for coming. Aslan tells her that he had been there the whole time, but that she had just now made him visible. Lucy thinks that he's making fun of her. I mean, how could anything that she did make Aslan visible? And Aslan explains to her that he has to obey his own rules. And like when God took on human form in the person of Jesus, he also had to follow the laws and rules of nature that he created in the world. That is why when Jesus performed miracles, they were miracles because they went outside of the rules of nature. So Aslan, he calls her out for eavesdropping on her two classmates, and Lucy thought that it was magic, so it wouldn't be considered eavesdropping. Then Aslan explains to her that it doesn't matter. It was still spying. Aslan also tells Lucy that the one girl she was spying on was afraid of the other girl. So that is why she said the things that she said, and that she didn't really mean it. And I want to read something from Psalm, or the entire Psalm 131. Lord, my heart is not haughty, nor my eyes lofty. Neither do I concern myself with great matters, nor things too profound for me. Surely I have calmed and quieted my soul, like a weaned child with his mother. Like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, hope in the Lord, for this time forth and forever. Lucy chose to turn away from these temptations and decided to be content with who she is and who she is made to be, as well as being confident and content in Aslan. When she sees Aslan, her face lights up, and she almost looks as beautiful as the other Lucy in the picture. This is a model for all of us to just trust God. Lucy asks Aslan if he could tell her the story in the book because she forgets it. And he says yes, that he will tell her the story for years and years, which makes sense that it is for refreshment of the soul or the spirit, because God refreshes our spirits. But first, before he does this, they must meet the master of the house, When the magician sees Aslan, he bows and welcomes him. We learn that these invisible creatures are subjects that Aslan has given to the magician to rule over. Now, the magician is impatient and waiting for the day that these creatures can be ruled without the use of magic, and Aslan tells him, in good time. We learn that these creatures are called duffers, and if Aslan were to show himself to these duffers, he would scare them out of their senses. Aslan is actually returning to Cair Paravel to visit Trumpkin, and before Aslan leaves, he tells Lucy he will see her soon, and she asks him when soon is, which he tells her that he calls all times soon, and then he vanishes. And this reminds me of how God is outside of space and time, so to him and Aslan, in this case, all moments would be soon to him, even if it is not soon to us. The magician's name is Coriakin. He knew that Lucy would come, take the spell off. He just didn't know when it would happen. Now he takes her to get some food, and he makes the tablecloth with dishes and food appear on the table. The food that was there included a piping hot omelet, cold lamb and green peas, strawberry ice, lemon squash to drink, and a cup of chocolate to follow. The magician only had bread and wine, which I can see as another reference to the Last Supper. I'm not sure necessarily the significance in that, but bread and wine always, I think, is a symbol for that. Before she knew it, Lucy and the magician are talking like they're old friends. Lucy asks the magician when the spell will work, and he tells her that the duffers are already visible and that they are probably still asleep. But she asks if their ugliness will go away. And the magician tells her it's only they who think that they were so nice to look at before. They say they've been uglified. But that isn't what I called it. Many people might say the change was for the better. Lucy asks if they are awfully conceited, and the magician tells her yes. At least the chief duffer is. And he taught the rest of them to be conceited as well. The others believe every word the chief duffer says. Lucy asks him why he uglified them, and simply put, they were not doing what they were told. It is their job to tend the garden and to raise food for themselves. Now, they wouldn't do it unless the magician made them do it. There was a beautiful spring up the hill that from there flows a stream that goes right by the garden. And the magician asked that they take water from the stream instead of taking their buckets and going up to the spring 2 or 3 times a day and making themselves unnecessarily tired and spilling out half the water on their way back. And they, for some reason, just point blank refused to do so. And I mean, we talk a lot about logic in Narnia, the idea of thinking logically. And in this case too, like, okay, yeah, there's a spring up on the hill, but if this stream comes from the spring and it goes right by the garden where you're already working, just get your water from there. Especially, if your boss tells you to do it. I don't know why. Yeah, I don't know. these duffers, man. Lucy asks a very good question. She asks if they're stupid. The magician replies simply by saying that she would not believe the trouble that he has had with them. And guys, it gets worse. So this is some other stuff that they would do. They would wash dishes before dinner to save time after, even though you would still have to wash them again after because now they're dirty after. Okay. They would also plant boiled potatoes in the ground to save time cooking them when they dug them up. But, I mean, wouldn't that, like, you be the same amount of time? I mean, it's stupid, but, like, you have to boil them to plant them. But then, like, if you did it normally, you would dig them up when they're done and then boil them. It's the same amount of time. Okay. So then one day a cat gets into the dairy, and instead of moving the cat out, 20 of the duffers worked at moving all the milk out instead. These are definitely not logical thinking beings. If I were to answer Lucy's question of are they stupid, the answer would just be yes. Yes, they are. But yeah, that was stressful reading that. The magician tells her to look out the window at the duffers now that they can be seen. So Lucy looks out the window and sees what looks like giant mushrooms, but it was actually the duffers laying on their backs. The things she saw were dotted all over the grass. They were far too big to be mushrooms, as the stalks were about 3 feet high and the umbrellas were about the same length from edge to edge. The stalks did not join the umbrella in the middle, but instead at one side, and there was a bundle. There was, a bundle-looking thing laying on the grass at the foot of each stalk. The longer she looks at them, she sees that the umbrella part was not really round. It is actually longer and wider at one end. The clock struck 3, and instantly each one turned upside down. The little bundles that were at the bottom of the stalks were actually heads and bodies. The stalks themselves were legs, but not 2 legs to each body, but instead a single thick leg. They sleep on their backs with their feet in the air to keep both rain and sun away. And for a monopod, which is what the magician calls them, to lie under its own foot is almost as good as being in a tent. They also go around jumping like frogs. So Eustace was kind of right in his assumption. Lucy asks if the magician made them like that, and he says yes. You see, the magician turned them from duffers into monopods. They were dwarfs before, but they weren't like the dwarves that we have in Narnia. Turning them into monopods was their punishment for not doing what they were told. Now Lucy thinks it would be a pity to change them back into common dwarfs because they are so funny and rather nice. And she asks if it would make a difference if she told the duffers that, and the magician tells her that it would if she can get it into their heads. Lucy leaves the house to go see the duffers, and she runs into the rest of us along the way. She tells us that everything is all right, that the magician is good, and that she's seen Aslan. And Lucy is celebrated by the duffers, and she compliments them, telling them that they look nice now. Now, in the book, it is difficult reading conversations with the monopods because the way that they always encourage and just agree and hype each other up all the time. They're having a really hard time accepting this compliment from Lucy, and she's getting a little bit frustrated with them. But she eventually gives up, and the monopods actually seemed content with what she was saying. And so we all go to the shore to tell the rest of the crew on the ship what's going on. They're all very anxious at this point. They haven't heard from us. And see, the monopods came with us to do this, and Eustace wishes that the magician made them inaudible instead of invisible, because they are very annoying, to say the least. Eustace regretted telling them this because he now has to explain to them what inaudible means. And he is, to say the least, unsuccessful in doing so. Reepicheep decides to grab his coracle from the ship, and he's paddling around with his little coracle, and he shows the monopods that they could move on the water with their feet. So eventually they try it, and it works. They make paddles, and they all paddle around the Dawn Treader. The monopods liked their name, but they kept getting it wrong. They kept saying things like moneypuds, mononods, pottymons. They got it mixed up with their old name, Duffers, and they ended up settling on the name Dufflepuds. That evening, all the Narnians dined upstairs with the magician, and Lucy noticed how different the whole top floor looked now that she was no longer afraid of it. The mysterious signs on the doors were still mysterious, but now looked as if they had kind and cheerful meanings. And even the bearded mirror now seemed funny rather than frightening. At dinner, everyone had, by magic, what everyone liked best to eat and drink. And after, the magician did a very useful and beautiful piece of magic. He laid 2 blank sheets of parchment on the table and asked Adrinian to give him an exact account of their voyage up to date. And as Drinian spoke, everything he described came out on the parchment in fine, clear lines, till at last each sheet was a splendid map of the Eastern Ocean, showing Galma, Terra Binthia, the 7 Isles, the Lone Islands, Dragon Island, Burnt Island, Deathwater, and the land of the Duffers itself, all exactly the right sizes and in the right positions. They were the first maps ever made of those seas, and better than any that have been made since without magic. For on these, though the towns and mountains looked at first just as they would on an ordinary map, when the magician lent them a magnifying glass, you saw that they were perfect little pictures of the real things, so that you could see the very castle and slave market and streets in Narrowhaven, all very clear though very distant, like things seen through the wrong end of a telescope. The only drawback was that the coastline of most of the islands was incomplete, for the map showed only what Drinian had seen with his own eyes. When they were finished, the magician kept one himself and presented the other to Caspian. It still hangs in his chamber of instruments at Cair Paravel. But the magician could tell them nothing about the seas or lands further east. He did, however, tell them that about 7 years before a Narnian ship had put in at his waters, and that she had on board the lords Revillian, Argos, Mavramorn, and Roop. So they judged that the golden man they had seen laying in Deathwater must be the Lord Restamar. Next day, the magician magically mended the stern of the Dawn Treader where it had been damaged by the sea serpent, and loaded her with useful gifts. There was a most friendly parting, and when she sailed, 2 hours after noon, all the Dufflepuds paddled out with her to the harbor mouth, and cheered until she was out of sound of their cheering. So that evening, we all dine with the magician upstairs in his house. Lucy notices that the top floor looks much different now that she was not afraid of it anymore. The mysterious signs now seem to have cheerful meanings, and the bearded mirror was funny and not frightening. For dinner, we all have exactly what we want to eat by magic, and after dinner, the magician does some beautiful magic and takes 2 blank pieces of paper and puts them on the table. He then asks Drinian to give him the exact route that the Dawn Treader had taken, and as Drinian describes it, everything came out clearly on the paper. It looks incomplete in some areas because the map only shows what Drinian had seen with his own eyes. The magician keeps one for himself, and he gives Caspian the other, and I think it's actually pretty cool that Caspian still has it in his chamber of instruments at Cair Paravel. But, it's got like nice little souvenir. The first maps ever made of that ocean. And, the detail in those maps as well, just that fact that if you took a magnifying glass to it, you would see exactly what the castles or the houses, buildings, whatever, mountains, they looked like identical to what they looked like in real life, which is very cool. The magician then tells us that 7 years ago, a Narnian ship came by, and on board that ship was Lord Revilian, Lord Argos, Lord Mavramorn, and Lord Roop, which are the 4 remaining lords that we're looking for. And so in the last episode, I said that we would later find that the Golden Man in Deathwater must be Lord Restamar, and we find that out here by process of elimination, by just looking at who Corican says was there, 7 years ago, and who we've already found. That only leaves Restamar as the possibility for who that was. Now, the next day, the magician magically fixes the stern of the ship that we damaged when we were attacked by the sea serpent. He also loaded the ship with useful goodies, or gifts, I guess. I refer to them as goodies. I don't know what they are, but I'm intrigued. And so we sail away 2 hours after noon, and all the Dufflepuds paddle out and cheer until we can't hear them cheering anymore. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of Faithful Fables. We will continue the voyage next time as we search for those remaining lost lords. We had an interesting adventure on Duffer Island. Lucy was faced with multiple temptations and came face to face with Aslan. She also set a spell that made everyone and everything visible again. We dined with the magician. He fixed our ship and sent us on our way. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned here, just about trusting God and being happy with who we are and being content in who we are and who He's made us. Obviously, always striving to improve and be better, but not to be vain and not to be conceited. The Dufflepuds were very conceited creatures, and they cared about their appearance, and Lucy was faced with a similar temptation with being the most beautiful woman in the world and having all the kings of the world, fighting over you and stuff like that. And so we just learned, there's these lessons here of not being conceited and being, humble and happy with who we are, and just trusting that God will be there for us to help us. And of course, we got to turn to Him. Let's remember to do that. And yes, thank you guys for being on this voyage with us. And if you haven't yet, make sure you comment and leave a rating on this episode. If you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe. It's free, and you can always change your mind if you want to later. And hit the like button. Doing these little things, I know that it can seem inconvenient sometimes, especially if you're just plugging in to do a task or something, and you don't necessarily want to just go comment now. So I understand that, but doing these things will help the show get in front of more people and get the word out. And so I want to just say thank you for your support. And until next time, stay faithful.